Welcome to the Murali End. I'm Dominic Machado, and I'm joined by Estelle Vasudevan, Sri Lanka's #1 cricket journalist. Today, we've got two big things to talk about. First, we're going to wrap up our discussion of the women's tour of New Zealand, and then we will turn to what we can expect from Sri Lanka's players in the IPL. But before we get started, please give us a like, a subscribe, comment, share your thoughts. We love to hear them. But let's get on to business now. So, Estelle, last time we talked about the women's tour to New Zealand, it was a very disappointing discussion about getting effectively whitewashed in the ODI series. The Sri Lankan women turned it around, drawing the T20 series 1-1. The last game was rained off. And in the first T20, the Sri Lankan women recorded their first ever victory on New Zealand soil. Again, marking kind of one of these big milestones, or another big milestone that they've kind of
Mhm.
knocked off the perch. So, Estelle, what did you take from this T20 series?
Yeah, I think they'll be really happy with that result, won't they? I mean, particularly because they weren't really at their best in the ODIs.
Hmm.
Um, to go to New Zealand and then beat, remember, New Zealand are world champions, right? Like, no matter how
Yep.
you rate them as a team, because a lot of people will probably rate them like maybe fifth or sixth in the world. They are world champions and they're returning
Yep.
home to play this series, right? And to beat them in their first game back, I think was pretty special. The bowling was fantastic in that game. Conditions were very conducive, I think, to our type of cricket, Sri Lanka's type of cricket.
Mm.
The ball was ripping a bit. Particularly the likes of Kavisha, I think, was getting a lot of turn on the ball. Overall, I think the question marks over who's taking your wickets, it remains, right, the strike bowling options, because if you look at the two games that Sri Lanka lost, they did struggle a bit. Inoshi Fernando remains, I think, the only one who seems to be able to pick up those wickets quite regularly. Apart from that,
Yeah.
they are lacking that wicket taking option. I also think the most promising thing, and I think we can talk more about this, was that young players or newbies were given opportunities, and a couple of them actually took those chances. So that was really
Yeah.
promising to see, because Sri Lanka do need, we spoke about this last time, it's, lack of depth is another problem, right? Because you have the same
Yeah.
12 or 13 players who repeatedly keep playing. But we did see a couple of them have good performances here and there.
Yeah. I think, that first match, uh, Malki Madara, right? 24 years old, first match ever. And, honestly, she was not even on my radar for
Mhm.
this particular match. I'll be honest. But in the absence of Udeshika Prabodini, she stepped in. She took 3 wickets. She was woman of the match, right? And what a debut. And I think the thing that was impressive about her bowling was she just hit good line and length,
Yeah.
right? Not particularly speedy, but knew how to use the conditions, knew how to use a little bit of the nip on the pitch to cause pressure. And um, even though she didn't take wickets in the other two get matches, she bowled pretty well. So that
Yeah.
was one thing that was really impressive to me. And I was going to ask you, Estelle, do you know much about Malki Madara? Again, as I said, she wasn't on my radar before this match. Anything that you could share about what you know of her previous career?
Yeah, actually, someone had asked me this on Twitter as well, and unfortunately, like, even I hadn't really heard much about her. I know she's a medium pacer, definitely quicker than Udeshika Prabodini, but yeah, it's that lost
Yeah.
generation, right? She's from that, like, age group that we spoke about last week, where we don't see that many players.
Yeah.
She does play for the Chilaumerians in domestic cricket, so she does play alongside the likes of Atapattu, which I'm sure had somewhat of a say in her getting into the team. As you know, Atapattu would have wanted someone that, or seen how well she can do. Sri Lankan domestic cricket, I think, for the women in particular, you don't really get conditions that are that conducive to pace bowlers. So it would have been kind of a welcome change bowling in New
Mhm.
Zealand. But you absolutely right. The way she bowled, I think that control that she has was nice to see in the first game. And we spoke about, how players need to start, being a lot more confident when they come into the team, and kind of grabbing those opportunities instead of, staying back and wanting to play support roles, and we saw that from her, right? The way she
Mm.
bowled. Um, they, in general, I think the team is pretty shy. uh, they're not, they're not the
Yeah,
most outspoken people. So it was good to see a young player coming in and putting that kind of performance on the board, and nice to see them backing her and giving her the 3 games so that she had that long run in the side. Again, though, the concern for me is another defensive bowler, right? She's not really someone who you
yeah.
would be expecting to blast the opposition out.
Exactly, right. And I think that that's the question. And I think um as you mentioned, right, that strike bowler is kind of very much lacking, right? Anoshi obviously is very good, and Kavisha on her day can absolutely be a strike bowler. But I think that's where
Yeah.
why Udeshika Prabodini has been around for so long is she's so good in those opening overs and at the death in terms of getting timely wickets, right? Her
Mm.
her stats don't necessarily tell that story,
Yeah.
but she's been so good over the past 2 years. And but speaking of young players who really sort of grabbed the bull by the horns, Manuti coming off of two bad performances in the ODIs. She
Mm.
really showed her talent and her skill in that second ODI, sorry, second T20, even though they lost. What did you make of her 35 run performance?
I think it's huge for Sri Lanka, to be honest, because she's one of those players who has played two under 19 World Cups. And I remember even after the first one, there were a lot of people talking about, what is the next step for this kid? Because she was only
Yeah,
15 or something at that point. Remember, only 17 years old, right? She's
yeah,
not, all she's seen is under 19 cricket. And imagine being brought in for your debut tour to New Zealand, where you're going to face, it's not only, I think what people also sometimes miss is the fact that it's not just the pitch conditions, right? It is the
yeah.
cold that gets to a lot of these Sri Lankan players because they're simply not used to it, right? To be in such discomfort, and sometimes
Mhm.
it's, I mean, in New Zealand it rained a lot. I remember when Sri Lanka toured England last year, I spoke to Russell Arnold before the first game, and he was saying, "Look, the girls are struggling. They've all got
Yeah,
like their hands in their pockets, and they're freezing cold, and it's raining, and it's gloomy, and it is a definite big adjustment you have to make, right? Because you're so used to the sunshine and dry weather. So for a
mm,
17-year-old coming into the senior side, I think." Particularly after the two failures in the ODIs, where she got, I think, a duck and one,
and one,
I
yeah,
think that should give her a huge amount of confidence and give the team also a huge amount of confidence. Because remember, this is the position that was occupied by Hasini Pereira for so long,
yeah,
right? And she's another one who they picked young, uh, another one with talent, but who just didn't
yeah,
seem to be able to do anything with it. So hopefully Manudi's situation is different. Of course, she bowls a bit of medium pace as well.
yeah,
She does seem like someone who, I don't know whether it's because she's played so much under 19 cricket, is that she seems a lot more comfortable in the lineup, because I was just going through some of the
mm,
games and the highlights. It could be something as simple as the way she celebrates with the team, right? Like a
yeah,
kid, like a 17-year-old kid who doesn't feel comfortable, doesn't feel like she can own that space, wouldn't
yeah,
be comfortable, being loud in the, in celebration or anything like that. But she looked quite comfortable in the field. So it would be, I think, a big confidence booster. And hopefully we see her in that tri series against India and South Africa
yeah,
later in April as well, because it's about building towards something.
yeah,
To be honest, I think there'll be a lot of people who say, look, why are they trying to change things
mm,
so close to a World Cup and with so few matches between now and the World Cup? But if Hasini Pereira has not been working for years now, so you might as well play somebody else, right?
yeah. I think the two things that stood out to me about um, Manuti's performance were, as you said, the being part of a team, but also being willing to play her own game. She came out and I think she hit four boundaries, right? Chamri hit four boundaries, but then the rest of the
Mm.
team and however many balls they faced only hit two. she was out there. She was aggressive. She played a beautiful shot, inside out over cover. She looks to be the type of
Yeah.
player who can take it to the opposition, right? Which we desperately need. Um, a player who doesn't just play sort of in the slipstream of somebody else,
Mm.
but who's
Mm.
capable of kind of pushing the tempo. And we've seen this in her under 19 knocks, where she's played some very sort of 150 plus strike rate innings. So she
Mm.
has that in her. And it's wonderful to see her express that in a senior team international match, right? Because the last thing you want to do is take a player like that and say, cut
Yeah.
that out, because that's what got her here. And as you said, we talked kind of last week about the senior culture that exists in Sri Lankan cricket. Like you sort of have to pay your respects, but she was out there doing her thing, and it was a great performance. And we've got to hope that she's got more of that in her. I think one thing that I think someone raised this question in the comments of the last video. Batting order is something that I've been thinking about a lot, right? So Manudi in the first match didn't bat in the top five, but then in the
Mm.
second did bat in the top five. Um, I like her batting down the order because I think it suits her natural game of being aggressive. But I think, and tell me your thoughts on this. I think I want to see Harshita and Vishmi take a little bit more, put a little bit more aggression into their game. And I think when they played really well last year, that was kind of a an element, is they weren't afraid to take the attack to the bowlers. They weren't totally reliant on Chamri to produce the boundary, but they were, and it didn't even have to be, going for big shots all the time, but running twos hard, running
Mm.
threes. I think with that Kavisha Harshita partnership we saw, that was a key element. They ran really, really hard. So what do you sort of, as we transition to this period where we're thinking about what is this squad going to look in the World Cup? What do you want to see from Harshita and Vishmi and Kavisha, right? Sort of these three figures who are squarely in the team, who we expect to do big things. What do you want to see them do to take the next step?
No, I think you're absolutely right about the intent. I feel like we saw that so distinctly during the last year preceding the
Hmm.
World Cup, right?
Yeah,
And that the World Cup performance really downed their confidence a little bit, because
yeah,
Sri Lanka went there with like high hopes, right, of challenging to make it to the semi-final, and ended up losing all their games. So I feel like this, that confidence that they had built up with all those good performances, because
mm,
Harshita, even in the ODIs, I felt like despite making 250s, there were times where she's like 9 off 25 balls,
yeah,
right? I, I don't know, even if you've lost 3 wickets, I don't think that that's the way to go about things,
mm,
because you're kind of putting yourself in a position where if you don't make a big one, you're making it even worse for the team if you get
yeah,
out, right? So that would definitely be something they need to address, in that, look, they know their strengths and they know how, what kind of shots what are their boundary shots, right? Because
yeah,
Harshita and Vishmi, I would say, are not Chamari. They don't clear the
yeah,
boundary like she does, but they have their ways of
hmm,
piercing the field and getting those boundaries. And that really needs to be there, because in ODI cricket it's easy to think that, oh, you have 50 overs, you can recover, but what's lost is lost, right? You don't get those deliveries
yeah.
back if you
And
give
it's hard to
away
bat
what.
out 50 overs, right? Like that's one
Exactly,
thing we've
yeah.
seen, is that it's
Mm,
not like, oh, we'll take the game deep. It's there are plenty of opportunities to get
mm.
out. While you're out there, you might as well get in and score some runs, right?
Exactly. And like you
Yeah.
said, it's like, and we've spoken about intent with regards to the men's team as well. Like, intent isn't just going out there and chasing every delivery, right?
Yeah.
It's about being, looking for runs, whether you're getting
Yeah.
singles or twos or boundaries. It's about looking for runs, and I feel like sometimes that kind of gets lost in the let me survive these overs
Mm.
kind of thing, right? And
Yeah.
look, we spoke so much about how far Sri Lanka have come, but that growth needs to kind of be linear, where you
Yeah.
see them developing year on year, instead of them having like 6 good months and then not
Yeah.
performing for a year. Because again, it seems like in this series, at least, we've gone back to, oh, we are still overly dependent on Chamari Athapattu.
Yeah.
She has to make runs, or Sri Lanka is not gonna get close to the total. Because we saw that even in the game that Sri Lanka won,
Mhm.
in that chase, again those thoughts creep up, right? Okay, if she
Yeah.
gets out, we don't know
What's going
what's
to
going to
happen,
happen,
right?
right?
Yeah, and
So
that's
that's something they have
yeah,
to work on.
right. And I think the point that you made, right? Vishmi and Harshita in the match they won both took it very slowly.
Mm,
They weren't looking to kind of dominate the bowling. And I think if you think about the stress a bowler is put on bowling to Chamari, you can't be like, oh, well, now Vishmi's on strike or Harshita is on strike.
yeah.
We can relax now. You got it. If you can put that little bit of pressure on the bowler, then it leads to big results and big wins. And I think that's what we kind of want to see. I wonder if, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong here, Estelle, but maybe a pinch hitter could be useful at the top. I wonder if Anushka Sanjeevani, who has opened and has shown a little
Mm,
bit of that oomph, could be a good person to maybe bring in to hit big a little bit. But and maybe that kind of strategy change isn't what they're looking for, 6 months out from a World Cup.
mm.
But it's something that could maybe inject a bit of life if they feel like the game is coming to them too slowly. And maybe um, I think it'll be very interesting because it's going to be. Is it the end of this month that the Tri Series starts? Is it the end
April.
of March? Yeah, it's April. Okay, and they're going to be playing South Africa and
Mm,
India, teams that can put a lot of runs on the board,
yeah.
and that's and they aren't going to be able to say, "Oh, let's bat out and get to 200." That's not going to win you
Mm.
any matches. So I'm interested to see how their mentality shifts as they get closer there. Um,
Yeah, and it's something that they have to do, right? And I wonder on just the pinch hitting thing, I genuinely have a question why Amma Kanchana keeps getting
mm,
overlooked, because I feel like she's one of the few people who can strike the ball, right? Like she's one of
yeah,
the few, I think, behind Chamari, someone who can actually clear the boundary
yeah,
comfortably. But she just doesn't seem to be getting the opportunities. And like with a player like that, I think of someone like, to be honest, maybe this is a wrong comparison, but someone like Tisara Pereira, who, like, a
mhm,
lot of Sri Lankans don't rate because, he never made runs when we needed it. All those
yeah,
conversations come in. But actually, like, to a great extent, he performed his role perfectly,
yeah,
in that you're not going to get 50 out of him every time he comes out to bat, right?
yeah,
It might be once in 10 matches that he makes a score, but that once in 10 matches, that's going to be a impactful innings.
yeah,
And I feel like Amar Kanchana has not been given that continuity to
mm,
show what she is capable of. But maybe it is the age now, she's 30 plus, and
yeah,
they don't know how smart it is to invest in someone who's probably closer to the end of their career rather than the beginning. But I feel like if they want to employ it, that ploy, they don't really have. Like, even Anushka Sanjeevani, when
yeah,
she's open, she's very much played the role that, like, Vishmi is playing, where
yeah,
she's been trying to survive the overs rather than score some runs. So
yeah,
um, it'll be an interesting thing. I mean, I don't know what you can try or what you'd be willing to try, but
yeah,
you can't. I think you can't be successful if you're not willing to risk anything. And what do Sri Lanka have to lose, right, at this
yeah,
World Cup?
exactly,
Honestly, Sri Lanka
right,
have nothing to lose at this World Cup, because I mean, I would say the T20 World Cup, yeah, they had a lot of, these hopes on their shoulders. But going into this World Cup, they don't have anything to lose.
yeah,
They basically can go out, they should go out there and play with no pressure, because
hmm,
if you lose by 10 runs after batting slow and making 200, or if you go after the bowling and lose by 100 runs,
yeah,
scoring 200 runs in like 35 overs, it's a
yeah,
loss, right? Either way. So you might as well do it in a way that you kind of instill that mindset that you can adopt. Sorry,
yeah,
yeah, you can adopt going forward, rather than sticking to a type of play that is, it does not exist in international
yeah.
cricket anymore, right?
Exactly,
Even
and
in
it's not gonna.
in
And what value is it gonna bring? You're
yeah.
not going to win matches.
Hmm.
playing that. Okay, maybe if you're on a sluggish pitch, you
Yeah.
might be that might happen, but that can't be plan A,
Mm.
right? Like
Mm.
that's the thing is there's no value to that as plan A.
Yeah.
I 100% agree. So one thing I was thinking, and we talked a lot about Chamri's form in the last episode. She obviously came good, right?
Hmm.
Estelle had put a word in to the locker room, and Chamri played a superb innings in the first T20. Uh, One thing that I was wondering and I was thinking about is, we've been pondering Chamri's retirement, and
Hmm.
it made me wonder. She's playing T20s, right? The year after a World Cup has concluded. So, do you think that means that she's thinking of playing in that 2026 World Cup, for which, Sri Lanka's already automatically qualified?
Mm. I don't honestly. I don't know because like every time I've spoken to her in the like previous couple of years,
Yeah.
it's been very much like okay, 2025 is the end, right?
Yeah.
Because
Right.
she's obviously got plans to move overseas and kind of pursue other things as well. But I feel like sometimes when you are the person who is carrying a team,
Yeah.
you can be easily convinced to keep going because you feel bad to let, you
Yeah.
know, because you feel
Yeah.
like if you go, that
Yeah.
it's going to crash, everything's going to crash and burn around you, right?
Yeah.
And I feel that's the exact same situation probably Rumesh Ratnayaka is in as well,
Mm,
because like I don't think there was ever a plan for him to be a long term coach, right?
right.
But he's
Right.
seen success. And now if you think about tournament by tournament, 2026 the T20 Cup, and then 27 you have the Champions Trophy which Sri Lanka is hosting. So then if she plays 2026, does she then say, look, I want to
Right.
play at home at the I mean Sri Lanka will host as long as they qualify within the top 6, but like
Yeah.
do I aim for that, like get Sri Lanka into the Champions Trophy and play that?
Yeah.
Because the look, the fitness doesn't seem to be an issue to me.
No. No. Yeah.
So all comes down to whether she's scoring runs and whether she wants to keep going.
I think on the matter of Chalmers continuing her career, it's totally up to her. And we've seen women cricketers play, you know, quite at a high level into their late
Mm,
30s and even early 40s sometimes. So I think it's all about her and when she wants to step away, how much passion she has for what she's doing. I wonder how much the 2024 World Cup is kind of sticking in her
yeah.
head, right? As a lost opportunity at a time where Sri Lanka really might have been able to pull something off, but we'll see. But I'm just glad she's in form, and maybe she's just playing these games to stay in form for
Mm,
the upcoming ODI World Cup. So that question remains to be answered. So speaking of T20 cricket, and speaking of playing fearless cricket, which again I think Estelle you reported on brilliantly last year. 7, maybe 8 of Sri Lanka's male cricketers
mm,
are headed to the IPL this season. Um, We've got Matita Patirana at CSK. We've got Nuwan Tushara at RCB. We've got Wanindu and Tikshana at Rajasthan. And we've got, let's see, at SRH, we also have Ishan Malinga and Kamindu Mendes. And then at DC, Delhi Capitals, we've got Dushmantha Chimura and potentially Dasan Shanaka. There's some theories floating around that he's been brought in as a replacement
mm,
for Harry Brook because he was in a picture of the team. I think the team was engaged in a prayer ceremony, and he looked to be there. He played for the Dubai Capitals in the ILT20 and had a monster season for them. So he potentially is the eighth. So Estelle, eight Sri Lankan players in the IPL. I think that's the most we've had in a long, long
mm.
time. So it's really good for the development of the side. But which of those players do you expect to see playing time? Because I think this is always difficult. We go in with so much
Yeah.
hope, but because of team combinations, because of overseas player rules, they don't always get to play. So who do you see as kind of playing a big role this season?
I think. The most kind of sure kind of guy is probably Vanindu, right?
Yeah.
Um, we would expect him to make that Rajasthan lineup, particularly because they don't really seem to have that deep of a batting lineup. If you look at
Yeah.
it, look at their squad. So Vanindu would be one. I wonder if they will go with Mahesh Deekshana. I think his last couple of seasons at CSK haven't been that great. And of course, CSK had the benefit of playing in conditions that were very conducive to spinners, right? So whether that
Mm.
will be the same for Rajasthan or not, we'll have to wait and see. But I do think they've kind of Rajasthan. It's very interesting that they got rid of basically their entire bowling attack, but they
Yeah.
recruited two spinners almost like for like what they lost. So
Yeah.
Chahal and Ashwin were the two that they let go of, and they get Tikshana and Vanindu Hasaranga.
Yeah.
So I think Tikshana is 50-50. Vanindu would almost certainly play. And of course,
Yeah.
Matisha Patirana is the other one who is almost a guaranteed pick in that CSK 11.
Yeah.
Just judging by how MS Dhoni and the CSK
Hmm.
management has kind of handled him over the last couple of years. So those three, I think, are the ones that have the best chance of playing, barring, I mean, I hope it doesn't happen, but like barring injuries, right?
Yeah.
Because the likes of Anindu, Matisha have had a few issues with injury in the past. I would it's very hard for me to imagine that Ishan Malinga or Kamindu will get an opportunity in that
Yeah.
SRH lineup, particularly Kamindu because they've kind of really stacked that top order, right? So
Yeah.
it might be tough to get in. DC as well. If Shanak is in the squad, I still don't see him playing
Yeah.
because they've named Faf Duplessis as their vice captain, right? So that might have been the only kind of spot that he would have
Yeah.
been eyeing. So it's going to be tough, but I think particularly for the guys at Sunrisers, I'm very
Mm.
excited. Like we were talking about this off air as well about what are they going to be like when they come back? Like what's is it
Yeah.
going to change their mindset in how they play T20 cricket? Because Sunrisers, as you guys would have seen last season, were like completely all out aggression, right? There was no backing down, no consolidation, nothing like that. It was like from the word go they were going for it. And I wonder how much of that will trickle down to these
Mm.
players and influence how they play for Sri Lanka in the coming series that we have.
Yeah, I think it's a really fascinating question. So there's a Sunrisers played an intra-squad match, a couple intra-squad matches, and they were again like 250 plays 250. They were all out, and it was really interesting to see how Malinga and Kamindu Mendes played. Kamindu Mendes scored a 60 run, a 30 ball 60. So he was there playing that sort of high flying brand of cricket, playing some expansive shots. And I think one of the things that Sri Lanka has been looking for is that number four batter in the T20 lineup. So if they can find some, if Kamindu can work on that part of his game and become a power hitter in the middle overs, that would be massive for them. They also used him a lot as a bowler. I think he picked up 3 wickets. He bowled 4 overs. Obviously, it's an inter-squad game, so they're going to, you know, use every bowler that they
Yeah.
can. But I think that's definitely part of the strategy is like, can we get something out of this guy? Because if you have a batter who can bowl spin,
Mm.
right, and give
And
you
with
like
both
one or two
arms.
overs, yeah, and with both arms, it makes it a lot easier for your side in terms of balancing and things like that. Again, I'm doubtful that he will play much, but um, working on bowling because we've seen guys like Aiden Markram and Glenn Phillips become useful spinners
Mm.
in T20 cricket, even though they don't really have any experience bowling spin prior to their IPL
Mm.
stints. So I'm hopeful that Kamindu, who will be working with Murali there, will get some good looks in. Um, Ishan Malinga actually took
Also, I forgot to mention, like Nuan Tushar for
yeah,
RCB might actually
yeah.
have a chance as well. Yeah, sorry.
It depends on injury, right? I think because Josh
Mm,
Hazelwood is a little bit of a
mm,
doubtful
mm.
starter. I think there's a question about whether you would rather have Hazelwood or Tushara,
Yeah.
depending on. what
I
your
think it will
bowling
depend on
strategy is.
whether, like, what kind of role you want, right? Because
Yeah,
I think we both saw this thread on Twitter about how maybe they have the new ball pairing covered because they've got
yeah,
Bhuvaneshwar and somebody else, right? Not Bhuvaneshwar, somebody else. Uh, Two relatively good opening
yeah.
bowlers. So, do they need to have Josh Hazelwood in that case? Because Tushara is probably the better death bowler.
Yeah, exactly, right. And Hazelwood is kind of a middle overs guy who can hit those hard lengths and make it hard to score. Um, so I think it's going to come down to a choice between the two and what you're really like kind of looking to exploit. I think maybe the conditions will matter if they can sense a little bit of
Mm.
swing.
Yeah.
Tushara might be a good person to bring in, especially just give him kind of a 3 over spell even at the beginning to kind of crack a chase or something like that. So I think he has a chance to play. I think the IPL teams tend to see him as more valuable almost than Sri Lanka does in terms of their outfit. They really tend to like what he brings and what he offers. Um, and so that'll be really interesting. I think to go back to the point about Wanindu, I think there's an interesting ploy that might be used. So Rajasthan, which is who are coached by Rahul Dravid, right? They used Ashwin as a floater, a spinner
Mm.
slash floater last year, and they've got I think five Indian batters in the top order. Their top five is
Mm.
all Indian, and they keep Shimron Hetmeyer at six,
Yeah.
basically, to handle death overs. So I wouldn't be surprised if they promote Wanindu up the order a little bit, like maybe coming
Mm.
in front of Drew Jarrell at five and to
Mm.
smash spin down the ground and kind of things like that. So I'm interested to see if I think they will use him as a batter. And I think that would be really great for his game to
Yeah.
kind of have that role and work on it. And I think, to kind of flip back to the Sara Pereira question you posed earlier. I think it's okay sometimes if you have a guy like Wanindu who can strike at the rate he does. You don't expect him to go off every single time, but once every five, six,
Yeah.
7 games, you want him to go off and win you the game, right? Just by that performance. And I'm interested to see how Thikshana is used. I think it'll basically be a call between Faruqi. I think it'll
Mm.
be Faruqi or Thikshana, whoever gets in, depending on the surface. I think people are sleeping on Thikshana. He's a massively improved bowler over the last couple of years. I think he's really been working hard on his craft, developing new deliveries, changing his pace, varying his pace. He is extremely dangerous, as we know, on any pitch that takes turn. He's going to cause a lot of problems for batters. So I'm interested to see that. And I think one thing that we always talk about is how experience in the IPL just changes the way that Sri Lankan players think.
Mm.
I think, especially for our spinners, it's good to have spin coaching that's not Sri Lankan based because there's kind of a Sri Lankan school of spin where you toss it up, you get revs on the ball, and you beat batters in the flight. That's not really how white ball cricket works anymore. Okay,
Mm.
maybe it is a useful tactic from time to time. So I tend to think our bowlers, especially our spin bowlers, bowl better after spells outside of the island than they do when they come back. So I'm hopeful for that, and I think having the likes of Kamindu and maybe Shanaka um, playing in these sides gives us an idea of batting strategy as well, because I think that's probably where we struggle the most. So one question I want to end with, Estelle, is so Sri Lanka's captain, right, is Charth Asalanka, who's never played an IPL game, and he's probably one of the few captains in international cricket at the T20 level who has never played in the IPL. Um, what do you think Sri Lanka loses by playing a guy or having a captain be a guy who's never played in the league? That's perhaps um, the driver of
Mm.
innovation in world cricket.
I think, I mean, you can judge it in two ways. I think Asalanka is probably the right choice for
Hmm.
captain for Sri Lanka right at this moment, right?
Yeah.
And he's backed that up with performances as well. Um, but I do think that he's missing out by not being part of the IPL, because you get
Yeah.
exposed to so many different coaches and players, and ways of thinking, right? I mean, you don't, like, forget about the cricketing context, any one of us,
Yeah.
right? The way we expand knowledge, the way we develop new perspectives is by speaking to more people, right? Like, the more
Mhm.
you are exposed to people with different perspectives, that's how you kind of develop all these different ideas, different ways of thinking. You understand realities in a
Yeah.
different way, right? Instead of the same people. That's why, I mean, sure, we are friends with people we grew up with, but they're not the only friends or only people we have around us, right?
Yeah.
You kind of, your circle grows as you get older and all of that. I think it's a similar thing with this, right? Where the more you are exposed to, it's not only you learning how to do things, but how not to do things, like particularly like
Mhm.
things like leadership, right? I
Yeah.
recall very clearly, in the early days of the IPL, an Australian cricketer, I'm not sure, he was not a big time Australian cricketer, but he played at Delhi where Sehwag was captain, and he did
Yeah.
not like the way Sehwag ran things, because he was very,
Yeah.
he'd yell at players and that kind of thing. So I think even being exposed to something like that, it allows you to understand what works and what doesn't work, right,
Yeah.
within a team. And as a captain and as a leader, I think it can only be beneficial to be exposed to a tournament like the IPL. I do think he's kind of unlucky
Yeah.
to not get in, because he had those couple of years where he
Yeah.
was he was quite good and, like, leading the charts as a T20 batter, but didn't quite get in. Again, developing the spin bowling is a massive thing, I feel, because he's a
Mm.
left-hander who can also bowl a little bit now, because he's
Yeah.
kind of had the practice in Sri Lanka. I think that could go a long way in potentially getting him a contract in the coming seasons. But overall, I think it's a loss for him. I don't think Sri Lanka, though, have a better choice than him to captain the side.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree. I think he has massively improved. He used to be a guy who struck around 110, and now he's striking fairly comfortably around 140, and particularly dominating pace in the last 2 years. He's striking at 159
Mm,
against Pacers, and he is striking at over 200 in the slog overs. And that, for a Sri Lankan batter who's batting at five, who's kind of from a traditional mindset, he's
mm,
been absolutely sort of fantastic in that role. So I hope he gets the opportunity. I think there may be one of the issues, maybe like there's a bit of a culture clash when it comes to having someone like when we had one Indu as captain.
mm,
We saw a lot of strategies being employed. That kind of you rub some people the wrong way, right? So I think that's one downside of bringing some of those new perspectives in, particularly in the Sri Lankan sort of cultural
mm.
setting, right? Is that there's certain
Yeah, because
ideas.
Charit
Yeah.
fits that, right? Like,
Yeah.
he's kind of the responsible, or he comes off as that kind of guy, right? Who you can count on, who's
Yeah.
gonna keep a cool head,
Yep.
that sort of thing. Whereas Vanindu was different. I think some of the criticism of Vanindu was fair, right? Like,
Yeah.
but and we spoke about this in the last episode as well, about like sometimes personalities like that aren't really accepted in a lot more, how can I call it? It's like a, not a backward, but a more demure kind of society, right?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily encourage standing out from the crowd.
Yeah. Flashiness is not necessarily seen as
Mm,
a good attribute, right? But we want to see them put on a show in this IPL. I want to see some good performances. I think, as we talked about a couple episodes ago, this is a big IPL for Wanendo
mm,
Hasaranga to kind of reestablish himself as one of the top T20 bowlers in the world, and to show those kind of batting bona fides that we all
mm,
know he has on on a stage that's not the LPL, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, Anything else that we want to add in before we wrap up for today?
No, the one thing I think is important to note, and which I hope would change in the future, is that we continue to see a lot of bowlers getting
Mm,
IPL contracts, which goes to show, I think, still that the batting hasn't really reached those levels.
yep,
Um, because our best batter is probably Kusal Mendis, right, in
yep,
T20 cricket, and he hasn't really had any serious interest from the IPL.
yeah,
So I think that should tell you that there's a bit of work to be done with the
yep,
batting in terms of intent and things like that to really get noticed. I mean, people will say Kamindu, but I don't think Kamindu is necessarily being picked purely on his batting. It's very much the temptation that look, the guy can bowl with both arms, and
yeah,
that's
exactly.
it's a special attribute to have in T20 cricket, right? It could come really handy.
Yep, yep, exactly. And I think that it remains an interesting question as to will someone become so good that they become like you can't not pick them, right? Because
Mm.
I think that's what you need as an overseas batter, as an overseas top order batter. You need to be
Top
so
order
good,
batter, yeah.
right, that they can't not pick you. You have to be Chris Gale level. You have to be Josh Butler
Mm.
level, right? That those are the guys we're thinking of. So, and we'll see if they can take that step up. Another thing I'll add on your point about bowlers being picked, it's also fast bowlers, right? We've got
Mm.
um, four fast bowlers in the IPL, which is just crazy to me. Who would have thought 10 years ago that we would have
Yeah.
more fast bowlers than spin bowlers playing in the IPL? And
And
speed.
probably like the likes of Madhushanka, if he'd actually had some game
Mhm.
time between the last IPL and this one, might have got picked once again, because again
Yeah,
it's an incredible skill, right? His left arm pace. You don't see that many bowlers who can bowl at that pace, move the ball,
yeah,
the angle he has, all of that. So we've been saying it right for the last year or so. The
yeah,
fast bowling stocks are incredible right now, and you've got a lot of skillful bowlers who will probably not even be in the conversation.
yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. Like Lahiro Kumara
Mm.
I mean, our number one T20 bowler or Asita Fernando is nowhere on the list, right? So yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, all right. Well, thank you for joining us today. We've got a lot more to talk about. It's going to be an exciting next couple months in Sri Lankan cricket, and we will be back next week on Monday with a live show. All right. Thank you. Bye.